deep in creating collateralized mortgage obligations. And one of his tenets is, show me a cash flow, I'll show you a bond. And that's how we got into CMOs. And a little bit of CMOs went a long ways. And the next thing
and we also have to acknowledge that the CMOs were also not only fraudulent in their very nature, but were many times used fraudulently. I know of many companies that are now facing the issue where they would create one of these things collateralized by a giant mortgage heap and sell it to George. And then they'd turn around and they'd sell it to me, not telling me that they'd already sold it to George, and keep doing that as long as they could get away with it.
And they're still getting away with it. I mean, Bernie Madoff and people of his ilk are the public face of it, but the real stuff has yet to hit. And we're now just beginning with the cap mark filing. We'll find out over the next probably 6 months or 8 months, once we get through the retail season, how bad it's going to be in commercial real estate, because many of the major retailers in the country, the so-called anchor tenants in a lot of the malls, pay rent that is maybe 40% base rent, and then 60% of their rent for the year is a percentage of Christmas. And guess what? We're not having one of this year.
Yeah, and we've got malls around this area here that are empty from the day they're built, and they just have stayed empty. We were building commercial real estate 5 times the rate of the growth of general population, even if you took in the account the rate of growth of illegal immigration into this country. We were still at 5 times the rate of population growth. So even under the best of circumstances, we have to shed 4/5 of all commercial real estate or stop and allow the population growth to catch up to demand. And that was never going to occur. The reason we had that was a giant bubble that was essentially engineered by Greenspan in the very late 80s and in through the 90s. That led to the boom time as a lot of automation went forward as well. And so that was when he adjusted things for what he called hedonistic accounting, and the government lost all credibility. That's when they brought in the birth-death model for reporting unemployment. That's when they brought in hedonistic representation of productivity, which really goes at the heart of the worker, because they came in and they said that each and every month you were more productive than the month before. Why is that? Well, because your computer was more productive. It could go faster and so on. And basically it was kind of a bogus way of accounting for the fact that they were growing money at a faster rate. And now we're going to live through the time that the rate of flow of the money through the system is obviously shrinking. And when we see, my real point is that I don't care so much about what happens to the commercial real estate market as when I see these financial players go ping, ping, ping one by one, and now we're starting to see them on the financial real estate market side, the financing. When these guys go, that reduces the volatility of the rate of flow of money through the system. So we're all going to go through a drought. And we don't live or die by the total amount of money in the system. We live or die by the rate of flow through the system that we can pass on to each other. And by passing on to each other, I mean this is kind of the reverse of what I thought would occur. I thought we would have repudiation by this point. By that I meant I thought there would be dollars coming in from countries all over the planet trying to just unload them, and ultimately they have to come back to us. And I think that probably will occur next year briefly, and that may also be coincident with the rise in gold and silver prices. But apparently at this point we're seeing the drought start to occur. So it'll be very much like living in the Appalachian area in the 50s and 60s, where there was a whole lot to do, but not a lot of funds flowing through the area to cause it to be done. And so a lot did not happen.
The other thing that you have to keep in mind is that we had advanced third quarter GDP out today, and the big hoorah was, oh, look, we're back to growing at 3.6%, based on activity in the third quarter. And there wasn't one story, there was maybe one or two, but that was about it. I went through and I looked at those advanced GDP stories, and I'm going, who is passing the crack pipe, who overlooks when they're reporting on this stuff that the third quarter included cash for clunkers. It included first-time home buyers. It included all kinds of adjustments. If you want to really see what's going on, John Williams has a website called Shadow Government Stats, and he keeps track of alternative real numbers. In other words, if you take the cost of living numbers and you back out the swapping of top sirloin steaks for ground sirloin and some of the other hedonistic adjustments, you can get a much clearer view of what's going on in America. Unfortunately, most people don't realize that in banks right now are turning away full-price financed offers because they really aren't expecting things to get better, or they know that hyperinflation is coming. They're turning away full-price offers on some of these distressed properties, and they're taking deep discounted cash on the barrelhead offers because the bank knows that they'll come out better on that in the long and short term.
Yeah, it's really quite shocking. We've heard some statistics from banks that indicate, for instance, very prominent individuals going on in with multiple millions of dollars on a multiple $1 million property. In essence, coming in with 100% financing. They just want to use the bank's money temporarily, and the bank says no.
So that points toward hyperinflation. Is there any possible way that we could go to a deflationary cycle?
You will. The two are not exclusionary. That's what everybody misses. Hyperinflation is merely a bump along the road to a deflationary depression. Am I not correct, George?
Yeah. What we should see might be this real short-term bounce up in the dollar. I think it could continue some distance for another month, perhaps two. Then we get into real serious inflation, and then it all seizes up when the confidence in the currency ultimately collapses.
And I think
then you're in Appalachia.
Yeah, and I actually am of the opinion that the collapse in the confidence will begin to manifest at a visible level around November 5th. Now, whether it starts, that starts a deflation, so to speak, of the dollar by reducing its purchasing power, which causes hyperinflation. You need more dollars to buy anything. Or rather, how rapidly that starts, I can't say. But the language seems to indicate that we're going to hit this real rough spot when those crocodile teeth start. And even though the release in the building tension is basically in a flat, plateauish sort of a thing, the real impetus of this is a downward trend for the American economy that leads us into a totally different situation by November of next year. And I'm just unsure at this point as to how rapid that confidence loss will trigger into manifest wild currency collapse and social disorder. Bear in mind, large countries and modern countries like Argentina, even though they had a history of and a practice of currency deflations, they went through this period of about 4 months, 2 months of a bond crisis, and then 2 months of a currency crisis, and then they were flat broke. And it can happen that rapidly.
So are you expecting a bank holiday?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and that's a goofy period, too, because I don't know what is achieved by that, other than the banks collapsing themselves. And we're sort of seeing that now. We're seeing a backdoor bank holiday, because if you notice, lots of people have suddenly had their credit cards closed on them. And that's, in essence, denial of bank services. So I had somebody send me an email, and they said, well, when do you expect to see them announce the collapse of the dollar? And it was like, well, it won't happen that way. Sorry, guys. If you're waiting for somebody to come on out and CNN and say the dollar has collapsed, it is not going to happen that way. If you're looking for the mainstream media, the propagandists, anybody you see on television to say that there's anything bad occurring, it's not going to happen that way. There's so few individuals that will tell you anything close to the truth coming through the television that you're going to have to be a little bit more perceptive. So there were, no indications at all this summer that over 1 million people marched on Washington. It did not happen. According to the media, never occurred. We did not have the sudden increase of over 250,000 individuals into a homeless state due to the foreclosures this past summer. Did not happen simply because it wasn't reported in the media. It's going to be kind of a very different depression in that sense, I think, because the media in the previous depression actually would say in 1-inch high letters crash across the top of the newspapers, and they just don't do that anymore because the media's whole purpose is to lie to you, and they're basically government employees because they work for our corporal fascist government structure now. It is collapsing, and we will certainly feel the effects, I think, in food first, and then energy shortly thereafter, or, almost simultaneously, and probably starting on November 5th. Does that mean a sudden jump in the price of donuts? I don't know. Ultimately, yes, but how rapidly, it's hard to say.
What's really cool, though? It's really cool to look at some of the rhymes with the last depression that are being set up, because we had, for example, the Communications Act of 1933, where government essentially seized control of radio, which was getting out of hand, and they needed to control things. And it represented a corporate profit opportunity, et cetera, et cetera. So while the administration, on the one hand, seems to be pressing ahead on net neutrality and some of these other, good ideas, at the same time, we're seeing GAO report that, if everybody stays home with swine flu, maybe we really ought to have some kind of controls on the Internet, because we don't have enough infrastructure for everybody to do a work-at-home strategy. And when I read that, I go, oh, my God, is that going to be the rhyme? How long before Internet access is going to be licensed?
Yeah, good point.
I mean, it's a communication channel. See, in order to understand what Clif does and to some extent how I look at economics, you have to be able to step back and sort everything out in a whole different way. Like, I look at communications as one of the 7 major functions of life, like housing, environment, food, finance, communications, transportation. Those are all integrated systems which interoperate, and the action usually occurs when either one of those key systems is changing or its relationship to other systems goes into change state.
You guys are too much fun.
Oh yeah,
Sorry about that. Yeah, you should hear us argue in private.
We'll go on like this for hours between us, going, did we miss? No, but it ain't here yet. We can see stuff, and people go, oh, we don't see it yet. It's like, oh, okay. So we hear the truck start the engine, the headlights come on, you're standing in the street, we go, wow, did you see the truck begin? And everybody, not everybody, but a fair number of Clif's readers and mine are going, oh, I don't feel like we've been hit by the truck yet. And I'm going, it's up to 20 miles an hour. So, okay, fine. When we get to middle of November, if you don't feel like you've been hit by a truck, then we'll gracefully admit, oh, that wasn't a truck, that was a
but also, I'm not saying that it'll occur that way, George. I'm saying that the language has turned. It was quite clear with the announcement, the building tension language announcement of the swine flu emergency. Okay, anything that where the government comes on out and tries to do something more in a grander scale along those lines creates building tension because it forces us all into an unknown state. And there were already enough people that were paranoid about that occurrence. So that started it here, and it's actually had various different ramifications all around the planet. So because it was a global populist thing, it was never intended to be, nuke out of a city in the U.S. And there's a certain amount of memering about our stuff. Let's be very clear about that. There are individuals who are paid by likely government that go on out and say, will repeatedly attempt to control anticipated results from our work in the general public. And I've seen it, we've tracked it. It was one of our first memering experiments. And what they do is they say, the web bots say such and such could occur on this day, and then they start throwing out in emails that's associated with